Welcome back to the show. What we're going to do here is answer some questions. You email us, podcast@grangersmith.com. We answer them like we're riding in the truck together, like we're sitting around a campfire. You say, hey, man, I got this thing. It's been going on. Can you help me with it? I got Ant-Man with me, producer of the show, and one of my best friends.
Yeah.
What's up, Ant?
Good to see you, man.
You too. Yeah. I don't know a lot about these questions that people have sent in for today's show, but I do know enough that there's a bit of a theme going on.
There is.
And so we'll see how that unravels.
It's funny, it wasn't on purpose, too.
No,
So I read through these and put them in what we call an ROS, to run a show for you. And I'm not thinking about answering them necessarily when I'm putting them together. I'm thinking about, well, this would be a good one to hear from Granger on. And then I get to stay here and talk to you about them. So I get to read them and rethink, about them. So
yep. So let's see if we can unravel this theme. The first question here comes from Kyle. It says, hey, Granger, I'll get right into it. My wife and I haven't been getting along lately. She says things like, I hate you and go shoot yourself, and that she wants a divorce. Me personally, I don't believe in divorce. I love her with all of my being. But her being so mean takes a toll on me. Usually the day after she says how much she loves me and that she doesn't want to split up. But it always comes back. We did marriage counseling, 3 sessions, and she quit. I ended up going back by myself because I'm trying to better myself. My question is, do you believe it's okay to file for divorce because of the way I'm being treated? I just want what's best for my children. Thank you for your time. Sorry, this is really hard to talk about. Kyle from Ohio. All right. Thanks for being vulnerable, Kyle. Appreciate the email. And there's nothing in here, Ant, that's asking if this is biblical or if he's a Christian.
Right.
So that's a little bit different perspective, because we're going to come to this podcast with a biblical worldview. And so, Kyle, without you mentioning that, some of the stuff I say may not make sense to you.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Yeah. That's okay.
Still applies.
It still applies. But this is where it gets really wonky with you, Kyle. Is I'm gonna look at from the point of view of you being involved in a church, which really changes the dynamic of this. Because as Christians, I can't say this enough on this podcast, and I'll probably say it more on this exact episode. Christians shouldn't go through divorce alone. It's not advised in any way that you should go through divorce alone. You should do it with your brothers and sisters around you, which is so encouraging.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, let's dive into this question. First thing that comes to my mind is, you say, Kyle, I just want what's best for my children. But that kind of contradicts a little bit to what he says earlier when he says, I don't believe in divorce. I love her with all of my being. Okay, so which one do we want here? Which one is it?
Yeah, and he's working on himself.
And he's working on himself.
Yeah.
So that we have a little bit of a contradiction, because if you only want what's best for your children, that's one direction. If you love her with all of your being, that's another. And if you want to work on yourself, that's a third way. My suggestion is, and my encouragement is, that if you want what's best for your children, that is reconciliation in the marriage.
Agreed.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. So you reconciling with the biological mama is better for them than you divorcing and trying to figure out a way to do what's best for them. That's not always the case. That's not always the answer. That's not a cookie cutter answer, because first of all, most practically, a lot of times reconciliation is not possible.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not. When I read this email, I read it one way again, for the podcast, but reading it as a response, first thing I see is she's hurting somewhere, and she's lashing out at you. And we just went through. We're going through Proverbs at church, and one of the biggest things we talked about a couple of weeks ago was the life and death being in the power of your tongue. With the same tongue you give life, and with the same tongue you give death. You curse somebody, and you give life to somebody. And when you're spewing out stuff that is hateful, like go shoot yourself and I hate you, that's coming from something in your heart that is disturbed. So there's some hurt with her somewhere. And I don't know if it's in this marriage, if it was before the marriage or what it is. We assume a lot with these emails because they're, what is this, 6 lines long, to diagnose an entire issue with a marriage. But there's something going here. It's not, it is salvageable from what I read, I believe, if you both want it to be. Sometimes you do get to a place where one of you wants it with all your heart and the other one says, I just don't love you and I don't want to be a part of this anymore. What do you do then? And maybe that's where we are with this one as well. I come from a divorced family and I am divorced myself, biblical divorce. But no matter what, it's hard. And ultimately, listen, if it's going to be hard no matter what, choose the hard one that keeps things together if you can. Because it's going to be hard either way. You're either you're doing one battle that's really hard without a helper anymore, and you might feel like you don't have a helper right now. But if you can salvage and get your helper back in that marriage, it is going to help make things better, and it's worth the fight for sure.
That's a great way to look at it. So it's going to be hard, Kyle. It's going to be hard no matter which road you pick right now. It's going to be hard in the road to restoration, and it's going to be hard in the road in being a single dad and starting over.
For sure.
Ant-Man's saying, from experience, since they're both hard, choose the one that's on the road to reconciliation.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure. If you can. And I say if you can because some decisions just aren't up to you.
Yeah.
Have you done everything? Are you in a church? Do you have brothers? See, part of mine involved things at a church. And so it made it hard for me to trust a church, not God, but a church for a long, long time. And even so much as we are just now really getting settled in a church that I fully am ready to be plugged into.
A healthy church.
A healthy church, absolutely. And that's very important. So, my first advice is just the question of where are you going? Where are you going to church? If you're not, well, you need to get plugged in somewhere, a healthy place, yeah.
Side note, another episode possibly, there is a big difference, everyone, between a healthy church and an unhealthy church.
Absolutely.
So if you have church hurt, if you look back and you go, I don't like the church because it did this and this, I would say just as there's a difference between an unhealthy doctor or a bad practicing doctor and a good doctor, there is the same thing with a massive chasm between an unhealthy church and a healthy church. Now we could do this on another episode and actually walk through what it looks like to be a healthy church, because you might think that you're in one and it actually might not be biblically healthy. Yeah. We could do this in another episode, but that's a side note to what you're saying. So here's the major problem. Looks like there's a lot of problems, but one of them, they did counseling 3 sessions and she quit.
She left.
So he goes back by himself. Now, what do you think, Amy? What do you say to a separation to begin this process?
What do you mean to start your...
To say before we file, we should live separately. What do you think about that?
Man, it's hard to reconcile when you're not together.
Okay.
I believe. Because, I think, should you have some alone time? Absolutely. I think separating and one person living in one house and somebody living somewhere else, I believe it's like you're moving towards staying separated versus moving towards staying together.
Unless there's abuse.
Of course, yeah.
So that's the caveat.
Yeah, of course, yeah. If you're being abused, that's a completely different conversation too. And this is some verbal abuse. It's not obviously here. 9 times out of 10, I would say that separating. Some people wake up and go, "Oh man, I can't do this by myself." And if that that is good to get that revelation, but.
So I think he's asking one specific question. My question is, do you believe it's okay to file for divorce because of the way I'm being treated? I just want what's best for my children. That's the question. And I think because there's so many unknowns, we don't get a follow-up question. Yeah. We don't know the situation. We don't know anything. Kyle, I don't even know if this is your first wife. or
Yeah,
not.
very true.
I don't know if these are your children and not hers. It may be. Some scenarios, this is his children from a previous marriage.
Yep.
That puts a new spin. So because I don't know anything about this, I really only have one piece of advice, and that is, don't make this decision outside of wise counsel.
Agreed. And that would, I think that is the answer to this email, is like that this has to go much deeper. This conversation has to go much deeper with someone that you trust, and if you're going to a counselor, what kind of counselor too?
Yeah.
Make sure they're Bible-believing,
Yeah,
faith-based counseling.
And I also, and part of what I mean by that, I'm talking about a team. Yeah. And so I'm not just talking about professional paid counseling. I'm talking about wise counsel in the aspect of friends, trusted brothers around you. So my answer, Kyle, my direct answer to your question is it okay to file for divorce because of the way I'm being treated? No, without wise counsel. Yes, with wise counsel.
Yeah.
So it can go either way. But if you don't have wise counsel, throw this whole question out. If you do, and they advise you, you need to walk away, then I would say you could trust them in this. She's abandoned you. There's abuse, verbal abuse. If you're with wise counsel and they say, no, don't file for divorce, I would trust them on that as well. There's room for reconciliation. But Ant-Man and I don't know enough about it.
Yeah. And I think the next question or the advice would be is like, or I would ask you, is how does he find that? How does he find that wise counsel? If he's not in a church, if they didn't grow up in that, how does he go find wise counsel right now?
This is something that we should be preparing before we end up in a situation, right? This is when you know CPR before you have to use it. Yeah. And so this is why, this is reason number 875, why being involved in a meaningful relationship with a good, solid, healthy Bible teaching church is so important. It is among other things, it's a tribe.
Yeah, for sure.
It's being in a tribe, which humans for centuries and centuries, millennia, have been involved in a tribe. Even when it's outside of the context of what a Christian church is. We're talking about Native American Indians. We're in tribes. And that those tribes, sorry, I have an airplane voice here. I just got off the airplane. So these tribes operated multi-generations. They weren't age segregated. Like we're so quick in society today to age segregate. Put the youth over here. Put the toddlers in this room. Put the babies here. Put the nursing mothers here. Put the young adults in this room. Put these seniors over in this room. And we segregate everyone so no one is learning from each other. And for millennia, humans have learned from each other without age segregating. So now here we are, and we're stuck in these situations where someone goes, I'm going through this big problem, Granger. I'm going through this divorce, and I have no one to talk to. That's because our culture has age segregated. Yeah. You have no wise counsel. You have no tribe. Yeah. The best we do with tribes sometimes is the youth baseball team that your kid plays for.
Yeah,
like that's your tribe.
Even worse, social media.
Even worse.
That's where
your social media is your tribe.
Yeah.
So, Ant-Man, your question is, what do you do if you're already in a situation where you don't have your tribe, you don't have your wise counsel, and you need to make a decision now?
Yeah.
And to that I say, this is doing CPR without ever taking a class. Yeah. It's very hard. There's not a right or wrong answer to this, but it's very difficult. So if you're listening and you're not in this situation, find your tribe. And I would say, above all, a good Bible-believing, healthy church is your tribe. That's how they function in the many ways that a church functions. It's your family.
I think that's our responsibility as men too. That's part of leadership and leading your family. Is you're wondering what you're supposed to be doing. Well, I don't have an issue right now that I have to address. What should I be doing? Things like that.
Yeah,
looking for things where you find your weaknesses. Where are you weak right now? Fill those holes, fill those gaps for you and your family. Yeah.
If you want to know who to pick for your wise counsel, you look at their fruits of their life.
Yes, for sure.
Not just because they're easy to talk to, or they're good listeners, or they're cool people, or their proximity, they're next door neighbors to you. Look at the fruits of their life and go, hey, brother, it looks like we all have mistakes and we all have a track record, but currently it looks like you're on a good, solid track. You have good fruits coming out from your life. Can you help me with this situation? what do I do? And build a tribe in that way.
Yep.
How we doing on time? We got it. Let's do another question.
Okay.
Kyle, I hope that was enough for you. Next question from David says, hello, David from Ohio. Me and my fiance are getting married in September. We're both born-again Christians and wanted your thoughts on birth control. Should Christians use it? Is it a sin? If we, Lord willing, have children, I want to give each child enough attention. That's what I'm getting at, he says. Thank you. Love to listen to the podcast when I'm on the road as a trucker. God bless. All right, David. It's a good question, and we should be thinking through these things. My first answer is, have your wise counsel around you. These are great questions.
Are we changing the name of the podcast to Wise Counsel?
Yeah, Granger Smith and the Wise Counsel. It's like the band name. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not really considered wise counsel because I'm not with these people.
Yeah.
I don't know you.
Yeah.
So my encouragement is to direct you towards what really is wise counsel.
This shouldn't be the sole counsel.
This is not it. This is not the counsel. But David, I think it's a great question, and we should be thinking through all these things. You say you're a born again Christian, and that's great. This is a form of your sanctification that's weighing on you on theological things, things that matter in life. Having children, planning for children matters, and so you should be questioning everything. Not just because that's the way it's done on social media, not because that's the way mom and dad did it, but am I thinking through this from a biblical worldview? Mm-hmm. So, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps, the Bible says. So that doesn't mean that we don't plan. Just because the Lord establishes steps, or you could say another proverb, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Yeah. That doesn't mean, because the victory belongs to the Lord and because he establishes our steps, doesn't mean we don't plan our way. And it doesn't mean we don't prepare the horse for the day of battle. So if you're planning on having children, great. If you plan on separating it out due to finances, or, which I think is a great point you make, giving enough attention to each child, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you're also not, the victory is not up to you, and the steps that you take is ultimately not up to you. If you're giving all that up to a sovereign God and going, Lord, if it was up to me, I would have children staggered every 2 years.
Yeah.
But Lord, it's not up to me.
Right.
So I'm going to plan like it is up to me. But I'm going to always know and acknowledge you are behind all of it in your sovereignty, in your purpose. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so when it comes to birth control, I don't think there's anything wrong. And there would be a gray line. If I started to name different kinds of contraceptives, there would be a gray line on what is biblical or not. For instance, the Catholics have long practiced the I don't know the word. What's the feminine calendar? You know when like girls have a cycle,
sure,
and they have a calendar.
Do I know what?
I don't know what the name of that is.
Raised with 4 sisters doesn't mean
well, Catholics know this. Yeah. There's a calendar, and the woman's cycle is on the calendar, and they could literally say, "We're safe to have intercourse during these days," and these days this is because Catholics essentially, hey, forgive me, I don't know a lot about this subject, but they don't believe in contraception.
Right.
So, but in following the calendar, that is a form of it. Sure. That's where I'm talking about the gray line is. Yeah. So we're talking about condoms here. Yeah. We're talking about following a calendar. I think there's a gray line. Yeah. Now, you're a lot less likely with a condom, right, with that contraceptive than you are with an accident with the calendar. But it's still a gray line. Yeah. Here's where I'm going to draw. This is where I draw the line. The line is the what do you call it? Abortifacients. What do you call that? What's that word? There's pills that are cell killing.
Like Plan B.
Abortifacients. Yes. I think it's so, something like that.
After you would have sex, you would take a pill to basically kill whatever may have happened. Yes.
Yeah. So that's where there's a hard line there for me. I'm not going to come down on you and say, hey, you and your wife in your practical planning should never use this form of contraception unless it is a abortifacient. I think that's the word. I'm sorry, I don't know. But this is a cell-killing poison.
Right.
I say, do not do that. I am personally against tying tubes. I'm personally against, what's the other one? The vasectomy. I think someone could make a biblical argument against me, and I could change my stance on that. So this is not black and white. But here's my point. Here's my point of everything I'm saying. I think it's very important as a family, you're not married yet, you're getting married in September. Oh, these are great conversations to have before you're married. Absolutely. And before she has her first baby. Great conversations. Conversations about adoption are great conversations to have. And so as long as you're walking through it, you're praying through it, Lord, we know that you say we plan our way, but you establish our steps. And so, Lord, we're going to plan on staggering 2 years between babies. We're going to plan on using a form of contraceptive so that we could plan this out. But Lord, will you crush this idea if this is wrong or if this is not within your will? Will you sanctify us in a way that just makes us so uneasy and so uncomfortable with this? And you're in wise counsel. You're in your church. You're in your small groups or your gatherings. You're with your pastor or your elders, however you call it in your church, and you're talking through this with them and saying, where do we draw the line on birth control? And your church may have some kind of established idea of this. And if you love the church and they're a healthy church and they have a certain encouragement, and they probably do, on birth control, go with that. Not what I say on this podcast, but the important thing and the point is you're thinking through this with a biblical worldview. And God will honor that as long as he gets the glory at the end and you recognize his sovereignty in it.
I think the planning is wise. To not plan is reckless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that your point, Ant, is let's just not the Lord brings babies. So let's just not worry about it at all.
Yeah.
Well, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't think that's wise either.
Right. And then, we do see that where people just don't care. They're just out for themselves. And, and they end up with babies that were unplanned and they have to change things in their life. Not always a bad thing, obviously, but if you're in a healthy relationship, you're getting married, you're talking about having this conversation, you're planning and thinking through stuff, which is already on the right track, I believe. Yeah.
If you want to get a hold of me, go to cameo.com/GrangerSmith, and I could send you a video message made right here on my phone, whatever you want me to say. Happy birthday, happy anniversary. It's a great way for you and I to stay in contact and to get someone a gift that might seem to have everything. Hey, get them a gift at cameo.com/GrangerSmith. Okay, let's get into this next question. If you have a question for me, by the way, email podcast@grangersmith.com. And the next question here, I just got off an airplane. That's why I have airplane voice. Is that a thing? Have you heard people say that before?
Airplane voice, but it's also, you're now in the business of speaking for a living. This is what, it's either in front of a crowd, a congregation, what have you. It's here on the podcast or it's on After Midnight, Mornings with Granger. All of it, that's what you do now. So this is to be expected.
All I do is talk, and that just leaves it all in the hands of the Lord.
Yeah.
Because if the Lord wants to shut me up, if he wants to shut down everything I do, he just stops my voice.
Turn the voice off.
And I am done.
See, in music, you can still play guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I am done if the Lord decides to shut my voice off. Okay, the next question comes from Brendan. It says, Granger, I'm a longtime fan of country music, even some of your stuff. Oh, thanks. I'm not the poster child for Christianity, but one thing that I've tried to do is watch my language, especially when in a crowd of people who don't. I figure it's an easy thing to do, and sometimes in the room might notice my conviction, and someone in the room might notice my conviction and find a similar one within themselves, or at least see that the profanity is not adding anything to the conversation. Where I've been finding an issue is when I'm working on the farm, often alone, and I, for example, drop something on my foot. The profanity slips out before I can even think to myself, don't say that. Those words in the moment bother me. So do you have any advice for a person who can control cussing in a crowd, but the words are enough on the tip of the tongue that they come out later? Or a mindset you took when you began seeing the issue with profanity that helped you? And does this mean I can't listen to City Boy Stuck? That's part of the joke. I listen to a lot of podcasts when driving. When I climb into the tractor, yours is the first one I always choose. It takes the relaxation of the tractor work and combines it with great reflection. Keep it coming. Brendan C. from Kansas. Hey, Brendan. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate the encouragement to me, and I appreciate the question. I think it's a good question. And I also, you know what I like to say, I like to see is when you say, I'm not the poster child for Christianity. Same.
Yeah.
Same. And I think that should always be our heart position.
Agreed.
It's like, Lord, I know what you ask from me, and I see it in your word, and yet again, I have not lived up to your commands, to the obedience that you have asked from me as a result of the grace that you've given me through your Son. So, amen. I'm not either the poster child for Christianity. And I think that's a good heart position for the rest of our lives, brother. And it's also a great question. Your question is, basically, look, I can pretty much control myself around mama and grandma when I'm talking. But when I'm out by myself and I drop a hammer on my foot, out comes the F-bomb. How do I fix this? And I think it's a good question because Jesus was always after the heart.
Right.
He wasn't after the facade. Yeah. He wasn't after what you do in public. He was after all of you, which includes what you do in private. In fact, when it comes to sin, he was just as interested, if not more interested, in what you do in private. Yeah. Because that truly reveals who you are. And so I think it's a great question to be thinking through. How do I control myself in private, not just in public? And it's so interesting when people say, this is not you, Brendan, but when people say things like, man, I can't control what I say. I am what I am. And I always think,
I have no filter.
Yeah, I have no filter.
Yeah.
And I always think everyone has a filter.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go to the superintendent of your school district and drop F-bombs. You probably wouldn't say it around your grandma, depending on your grandma. If you went to a cocktail dinner with the governor of your state and you got 5 minutes with him, you probably wouldn't drop the F-bomb. Yeah. So everyone has a filter somewhere. Yeah. Some are smaller than others, but everyone has one. So everyone has the same filter in private. Here's where I want to go, Brendan. Most likely, and I love that you're thinking through it. That's great. Most likely, in this scenario, we need to look at what we're consuming in our lives. Mm-hmm. Because if we're consuming rated R movies all the time, if we're listening to other podcasts with cussing all the time, if we're listening to music with cussing all the time, then it is second nature for us, and it becomes the default. Yep. So when we have a facade of filter around grandma and in public, but what happens in private reveals what's really in there, that's also a pretty good indication of what we're consuming. So I would say begin, Brendan, to eradicate and pay close attention to what you're paying attention to. Whatever it is in your life that you are focused on, pay attention to what that is that you're focused on. What do I mean by that? I mean, start taking accountability throughout the day. If your way of relaxing is watching a movie that's got murder and shoot 'em up and sex and adultery and cussing all in the movie, and you say, that's just the way I relax, that is penetrating your soul. These are things that are slowly bleeding into your life. And so eradicate that. Start to pull out, instead of saying, how do I control myself in private, Granger? I say, start to control what you're consuming. And I think that will take care of itself. What do you have on this, Ant?
Pretty elementary, but it goes along with that. And I want to have a nice yard. I don't know anything about having a nice yard. Like I don't know all the mechanics of it. Keep it mowed, try to keep it green. And then I found out that there are weeds in certain parts, but when I mow, evidently I end up spreading the seed into other parts of the yard that didn't have weeds in it before. And then I'm trying to battle both of them, right? And that's kind of how I see and how I feel it's been in my life with cursing. Just like you said, if you don't eradicate it in one area, i.e. what you listen to and what you consume, it's going to spread to other parts of your life. And if it becomes, he's concerned with it when he drops a hammer. That's really cool that you're like that, because if you weren't concerned with it then, you'll just eventually not be concerned with it when you're with friends, and then it becomes normal there, and then you won't really be concerned with it when you're with your parents or in a place where you don't, and then you say it and you realize you shouldn't have said something in that instance or in that atmosphere, and you're like, oh, how did this come about? Well, go back to how you were feeling, no longer feeling convicted when you said it alone, Yeah. And it just continues to spread throughout your life if you let it, and you don't. And it's a weed, Yeah. And if you don't take care of it when it's small, it starts taking root in other parts of your life.
And Brendan, I've been there. I know exactly.
Same.
That was a level of sanctification with me where I was frustrated with things that came out of my mouth when it was a reflex. It's a knee jerk.
That's a conversation you and I have had. I said I didn't want to listen. I like these podcasts, but I wanted to start weeding these out because the language in them were just awful. It was guy podcasts, so guys just cuss around each other. Well, guys don't have to cuss around each other. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the question, does this mean I can't listen to City Boy Stuck? That's part of what I'm saying.
That's the most important question right there.
Literally, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're going to hear, eventually I will put out a live record for the last concert that I did. And you'll hear, if there ever was a cuss word, a D word or an H word, all of those were turned into heck no on that's City Boy Stuck. Yeah, City Boy Stuck is heck no on the live record. And even that was a form of sanctification for me to get there. And then even beyond that, it's like, I shouldn't even say that. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, it depends on what you're consuming, what you're surrounding yourself with. And I'm sorry, I was that influence. I was a bad influence on people as Earl Dibbles Jr. and with the music. So forgive me of that. I'm trying to eradicate that out of my life as well.
They're close to the end of your tour. When I would go out with you, I would like what you have on right now, in-ears. I would have those in while I was shooting photos or whatever I was doing, and I would, because when you have them that close to your eardrum, you hear the full word, not what you are used to singing in the song. And I was like, oh, he's changing the words to songs. Yeah. There's a change, and I started noticing that then.
Yeah. Next question comes from Travis. It says, hey, hope your day is going well. Sorry. I found your podcast a few months ago during some long hours at work. It had made me think about God, and that makes me think about my old roommate. I'm glad, first of all, a side note, I'm glad that I make you think of God. Sorry, I have airplane voice. Have I said this yet? I found his listing on Facebook of looking for a renter in a room. I had to move for school and couldn't find anything I could afford. I moved in with him and had a great time with him and his fiance. I proposed to my now wife in that house and then moved out a few months later. We would hang out from time to time. Then one Thursday in December, we were supposed to hang out. I had a garage with a dartboard. We started a game we never got to finish. I texted him a few times that day to make sure he was still up to hang out. No response. A few hours later, he texted, or so I thought. It was his wife. He had taken his life that day. Around the 1 year mark, I sent a Facebook message to his widow, but it never went through. My wife was able to message her just fine. I'm not sure if this is a message from God or not. He was a very religious person. Christmas was his favorite time of year. Now for my question. Should I keep trying to reach out to the widow of my friend or leave it since since the first time the message didn't go through. I've driven by the house a few times, and it doesn't look to be kept up. I think she moved back to her parents' house. They are, all of us are in our early 20s. Thanks in advance, Travis. Okay. Tough situation, Travis. Let me kind of dive in. This is multi-layered. So let me dive in as if we're sitting in the cab of a truck. I'm going to start with, you found my podcast a few months ago and it made you think about God. That's interesting to me. Let's come back to it. Secondly, you got a buddy from Facebook because of the room for rent. He wasn't a great buddy. He was just a good acquaintance, right?
Sounds like they did a lot of life together.
They did some life together, yeah. The message to the widow that didn't go through, is this a message from God or not? No. God's not going to communicate through a failed Facebook message. God is sovereign over everything, including Facebook messages. So if God didn't want the message to go through, he will do it or not. That's not in question. The question is, was God trying to send you a cryptic message through the Facebook message not going through? That no. The Bible doesn't speak in terms of God knowing us in that way or speaking to us that way. He speaks to us in one way, and that is through the Son, the Word of God, the Son made flesh, Jesus, through the Bible. We have 66 books, God-inspired, written by over 40 different authors over the course of 1,500 years, revealing the truth of who God is and how he has revealed himself to us to reconcile us to himself, to bring us to himself through his Son, Jesus. That's the way he communicates to you, not through a failed Facebook message that's cryptic. Should I know if this is God trying to say something like we're in the movie American Treasure? What's that movie, Treasure? The National Treasure.
National Treasure. Yeah, there you go.
This is not National Treasure.
Sorry, I wasn't help there.
Okay, so we've established that. And then let's look into, he was a very religious person. Christmas was his favorite time of year. That's not really part of this topic. I'll lay off that. Should you keep reaching out to the widow? I would be very careful because she's a widow, she's single, and you're married. So you have to be careful with that dynamic. I love that your wife is reaching out. That's a great thing. But you don't want to send a signal that you are reaching out privately to a widow that is vulnerable to a very nice man that just wants to help. That's a bad situation. Would stay clear of that. You've been out by the house. It looks like it needs to be kept up. Work through your wife in that. It's great. It's a biblical command to take care of widows and orphans. But make sure you're doing this in a responsible way, i.e. through your wife, and have her reach out and say, hey, I saw that the house has some weeds. Do you mind if I send my husband over there? He's got a weed eater, and he'd be happy to take care of it. Yeah. And that way you're protecting your own marriage through a potential temptation. As simple as that. We don't have to go any further than that. And she's in her early 20s. Most likely she will be remarried. Yeah. I don't say that with trying to be without sensitivity to the situation, but this typically what's going to happen is she'll remarry, as difficult as the situation is. And she's going to be okay. Very, very, unbelievably difficult situation. Of course. So I'm not trying to be insensitive, but this is different if she's 70 years old and she's a widow and she doesn't have a family and she doesn't have, that's when you go over and you go, ma'am, I'd like to start doing your grass, take care of your grass if that's okay, and maybe I can come and clean some of this stuff off your front porch. That's a different situation than she's early 20s. Yes. And you're going, is there anything I can help you with? Yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, agreed.
I think the most important part of this entire email is the first sentence. I found your podcast a few months ago, and it made me think about God. I think if anything, Travis, I want to use this as an opportunity, not for the grieving widow, not for the guilt that you may have. There's always a weird guilt around suicide. In fact, yesterday I was speaking at a church, and a man came up to me afterward, and he said that his dad just committed suicide 2 months ago. And he said, I'm having trouble grieving, and I don't know why. And I'm no grief book seems to matter to me. No advice anyone gives me seems to matter to me. And I said, that's because suicide it carries a different weight to it.
Sure.
Because it carries a sinister guilt into all the people that knew that person, thinking, could I have done more?
Right.
It's not like a cancer.
Yeah.
It's not like a heart attack.
Yeah.
It's not like a car accident. This is something that everyone around the suicide starts questioning themselves. Oh, you think about the last conversation you had. You think about the last time you were with them. You think about, should I have seen it? Yeah. Should I have reported it? Should I have done more? Everyone thinks that. That's different than cancer. Mm-hmm. So, Travis, this is a little bit of what's going on with you. You're thinking, man, that dart game. I texted him, no response. Should I have texted him an hour earlier? Mm-hmm. Should I have scheduled that dart game the day before? If I had, would this have been different? Yeah. So recognize that this is part of your struggle. And go ahead.
Well, no, you've already touched on it, but man, you saying that's part of your struggle, to then latch on to someone of the opposite sex to go, oh, we're struggling with the same thing, is very, very, very dangerous. Mm. So if you think that there was and I know there's not, but if you think there was a message from God and not getting that message through to her on Facebook, I would just consider it protection and move on.
That's great.
Just you were protected. You made a rash decision and shot her a private message. That was protection that it didn't go through.
I think that's great. I think it's great. There's a difference between God protecting you and God sending you a cryptic message through the message not going through. Like Ant-Man saying, let it go. And then let's start thinking about why my podcast makes you think about God. And I'm very grateful that the Lord could possibly use this podcast for someone so that he might draw someone to himself. If this podcast, the Lord uses this podcast as a conduit for that, man, that's amazing and so encouraging. But I want to follow up on that and say, Travis, I would think about how God does reveal himself. Because if you're open to the consideration that God might message you, send a cryptic message through Facebook to you, I would consider what Christians know to be true in the way that God has revealed himself, and that is through the Bible. Yeah. And we spoke a little bit about that. But then I would consider why God has revealed himself in the Bible and what the message of that Bible is. And truly, the message of that Bible is that you cannot be good enough for him. Mm-hmm. That you could not make up for the sin that has separated you from God, which is a rebellion of God who created the world, and it was good. And he created man in his own image, and it was good. And then man rebelled against him in the garden, instantly wanting to be God himself in a way. And through that, we have inherited that sin, and all of us have followed suit with our original father, Adam. And you could testify this to yourself. I can, you can, Ant, and Travis, you can too. Thinking back to, have you rebelled against God? Mm-hmm. Have you used yourself in a self-centered, controlling way where you become your own God, in charge of your own salvation, in charge of your own destiny? The answer is always to that. Yes, we all have. And so you think, well, what do I do to make up for this? How do I fix this problem? And the truth is that would be like a murderer sitting in the courtroom saying, Judge, I'm really sorry. I murdered. I committed a huge crime. And I want to tell you, I've learned my lesson and I want to do better. How could I do it? And the judge says, I don't really care what you say about who you are now and that you've changed. In order for me to be just, in order for me to be a good judge, I have to carry out my punishment. Yeah. And so that's a major problem with humans and that separation to God. But God, knowing this, knowing that we couldn't make our way to him, the story of the Bible literally is that God came to us. He condescended himself, the creator of the universe, to become man, to come into his own universe that he created, to live the perfect life, to be the example of what Adam should have been, the original Adam that failed. God comes in the form of man as Jesus to be the second Adam, to be the perfect one, who then went to the cross and died as a sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice of all that punishment I said that the judge gives to the murderer. Jesus takes that punishment on himself. He takes the sin of the world, all of it, onto himself from the wrath of God, the punishment that the just judge has to still punish. So now back to the scenario of the murderer. He goes, "Judge, what can I do?" And judge gets a notice and he goes, "Actually, a man has stepped in your place and taken your punishment on himself.
Yep.
So now I'm just to set you free. And now that you're free, you live a life of gratitude in obedience to the one that set you free." That's what the Bible says Jesus did for us. And so I want you to explore this idea that the Bible says, and that if God communicates with us in this way, and there is only one way that he made for us to be able to know him and to know what he wants, to know what he loves, to know what he hates. If there is only one way, the Bible, then there must be a need for you to read it, like an instruction manual for your own life. And then there must be a community called the church that could surround you and help carry you through situations like this Facebook thing, Travis. That's my encouragement to you. You have anything to add to that encouragement before?
No, that's great. That's a great example. No, that's awesome.
I appreciate you guys, all of y'all, for emailing. And if you want to, if you want to keep it coming, shoot a message to podcast@grangersmith.com. And like always, we'll see you next Monday. Thanks for joining me on the Granger Smith podcast. I appreciate all of you guys. You could help me out by rating this podcast on iTunes. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to this channel, hit that little like button and the notifications bell so that you never miss any time I upload a video. Yee yee.